Joe Buscaglia of WGR with Armen Levack. And Joe, what's the story with C.J. Spiller? Not eligible for another 2 weeks. How's he looking now? The feeling on him being able to come back towards the end of the season?
Well, he was just able to get out to practice, and I think it was just them wanting to see what he could do and how far along he has come since his injury has started or has really come along. And it was just the first day he was eligible to practice, so it's a good sign that he was indeed able to get out on the field. Now, whether or not he'll be ready for the first time that he's actually eligible to come off the short-term IR designation that he has, that's another story entirely. But for the time being, he is on the practice field, and if all goes well, then he would be able to be eligible to return for Week 16 against Oakland.
All right, well, you know, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is that the Bills have a very tough road ahead of them. What's the vibe around there? Do they think they got a shot at making the playoffs?
Well, I think they're loose. I think this is a team that kind of knows that no one is giving them a chance, and it might be rallying them a little bit. But that said, it can rally you all you want, and you're still going up against Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady 3 out of the next 4 weeks.
Well, and Derek Carr.
Well, yes, and Derek Carr. I mean,
shut up, Levack. He's a Raiders fan, Joe. Don't let him get in this argument.
I was just going to say, how dare I forget his name? I really apologize for that. But I think this team is going to have a really, really tough time with it. I mean, going into Denver is tough enough, and then having to go up against Peyton Manning, who is just tearing people apart at home. I think that Denver team is averaging over 35 points a game in 6 games this year. They're 6-0 at home. I mean, it's just for as good as the Bills' defense has been this year, I think they're really going to struggle this coming week. And when you look at the AFC wildcard picture as it's structured, you have 6 teams that are tied for the 6th and final playoff spot at 7-5. The Bills right now are behind the 8 ball in terms of the tiebreaker because they have a poor conference record. 3 of their 7 victories came against the NFC North. So that puts them at 4-5, which is a step behind some other teams. And in order for them to get in, you would have to think that they would need to get probably 3 conference wins down the stretch here, and just 3 wins to have enough wins to be able to get into the show entirely, which would have to mean that they defeat 2 Super Bowl caliber teams in this final stretch of games.
Yeah.
So it's not looking good to me.
It's going to be tough. We've been talking about that. We agree with you on that one. Joe Buscaglia of WGR with Armen in the back of 104.5 The Team. At Joe Buscaglia on Twitter. Great Bills nuggets that he drops, including what's the latest on Sammy Watkins, Marcel Darius with the hip injuries. They were listed on the injury report earlier this week. How are they now?
Yeah, it seems they're both practicing. Sammy Watkins said after practice yesterday that he feels good. That it was just like a bruise, and he's expecting to play. So it really doesn't seem like there's any concern there. Marcel Darius, we really haven't heard a lot about, but he did come back from his injury, albeit briefly, against the Browns in the second half. But so I would tend to think that he's probably going to play on Sunday. So really, the only 2 guys that will probably be taken out from the game plan, so to speak, are the same 2 guys that were out last week against Cleveland. That's reserve defensive end Jarius Wynn and reserve tight end Chris Gregg. Other than that, the Bills are pretty healthy.
Now, last time we talked to you, we weren't sure what Doug Marrone's future looked like. Let's say they win 1 or 2 more games. Does Doug Marrone keep his job?
Well, if they win 1, I think it gets really interesting. If they go 8-8, can the Bills look at themselves and go, all right, well, this is our first team since 2004 that has finished 500 or better.
Wow.
Do they look at it that way? Or do they go, hey, you know what, this team had a lot more talent than to be 8-8. And with the new ownership go, perhaps we don't really like how things were handled around here, and maybe we want to move on from that. If they take it and go 0-4 down the stretch, I think he's probably done. If they end up winning 2 of these 4 games, I think he's absolutely safe. But if he gets to that 8-8 mark, I think it gets a little bit hairy. And that there's a legitimate discussion that will be had if they managed to only beat Oakland as expected.
Now, the other thing I've noticed is the overall and astounding hatred for Toronto carries over, and now you won't play one game a year in Toronto anymore. What's the skinny on that? Just low, poor attendance, or?
Well, I mean, it was done, and I respect the reason that it was done, because the Bills were trying to make themselves into a viable franchise, and they wanted to get into the market. They've already gone into Rochester, which is a pretty solid market, with their training camp each and every year. They have it out there. And they wanted to try and get into the Southern Ontario market because Toronto is a huge untapped resource for the NFL, and they wanted to make it their piece. So they gave up one game a year, got compensated quite handsomely for it, might I add, and they were able to give up that one game. But what they did not anticipate is that the overwhelming support of the crowd was just sterile. It wasn't really an NFL game. The field conditions were atrocious. The venue was terrible. I mean, all in all, it was just it was not a very conducive situation for football. And if they would have been able to play somewhere else in Toronto or somewhere neighboring that was an actual football field, perhaps it could have worked a little bit better. But it was just you could tell it was a total money grab, and I understand why they did it. It's just the actual nuts and bolts of it did not work out at the end.
He's Joe Buscaglia of WGR with Armen and Levack on 104.5 The Team. And Joe, man, good luck to the Bills, and it should be an interesting next 4 weeks on many regards. And hey, it's been a fun season considering at the beginning of the year there were so many question marks. A lot of answers have been known. Levack and I have been talking about, I mean, everything that the Bills have been through, from the snowstorm to the ownership. It seems like, do you feel like this community, this team has become even more tight-knit over the last 3 to 4 months?
Yeah, but certainly. I mean, I'll tell you what, the snowstorm definitely brought the team together. It could have done one of two things to that team, and it could have just absolutely, put the stake through their season, or they could have came together like they did. And to their credit, they absolutely did. So, I mean, I'll tell you what, this season has been the most unique season I have ever covered, and there are just so many different things that have happened there. I mean, quarterback switches, ownership changes, snowstorms that forced the relocation of the entire franchise for a 3-day stretch, and there's much, much more. I mean, drama everywhere you turn. This season has just been unreal in that respect, and now we're going to see how this thing ends when they're going up against 3 out of 4 teams that boast a Super Bowl winning quarterback.
Joe Buscaglia of WGR in Buffalo. Joe, thanks for your time, man. As always, we appreciate you.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, bro. Talk to you later.